Today's session is with one of my dear friends and one of the oldest members, not in age, but in longevity of the D word. Nina Seavey joined us. I looked it up, Nina, February 2001.
Hmm.
You've been like a very active, beloved member. You just have contributed hundreds, if not thousands, of posts over the years.
Oh, oh no. Uh-oh.
And I first met you as as a filmmaker, but I think we met when you started Silver Docs, the Silver Docs Film
Mhm,
Festival. But
mhm.
I will let you kind of introduce yourself, but you've been, um, you've gone from filmmaking to podcasting to teaching to being an author, lecturer. You run workshops. Um, What am I missing? I'm missing some big stuff here.
Yeah, I'm a mom. I'm a grandmother. It's no,
Yeah,
I've been sort of doing what we're all doing, which is sort of clawing my way through this journey for the last 40 years. Um, and, um, and, it, but it's led me in a lot of directions that I think that we as documentarians really need to think about. And, I don't ever want to, people always say to me, oh, how did you do it? And I'm like, you know what? My experience is, all of our experiences are kind of sui generis. They're just our own, right? So I'm not sure that that there's anything that's kind of to, I mean, there's nothing that's to be necessarily taken away literally from what we're about to talk about, but I think that each one of us needs to think about these issues now, in particular, that the documentary industry has seen such a, and I'm not going to call it a collapse because I don't think it's a collapse. I think it's a retraction of a certain kind. And that's very normal. I mean, for those of us who've been in this world for a long time, know that there's been times that, we've gone like this and times that we've gone like that. And that's just the nature of industry. That's the nature of business. And so whenever we have one of these periods, I think we need to be a little bit more entrepreneurial. We have to be a little bit more um, inventive and adventurous. And I am kind of a very adventurous person. And I don't mean to say that in the sense of risk taking, because I don't believe in risk necessarily, but I believe in calculation and using my abilities to provide, to kind of satisfy what I think is really all what is in all of our souls, which is the need to tell true stories. And I think that's what unites us. And I think that's what, when Doug started the D word, that attracted me, like you say, really early on to it. And that I think it's the one thing, while we don't share a lot, in terms of life experience, we all do share this notion that it's almost like something we can't not do. It's like we almost have to do it. And, it's a certain kind of a calling. And, one could say it's a certain kind of madness, but that's okay because I think that we can bring a a rationality to the madness that allows us kind of to actually make it sustainable. And that to me is the most important thing because I do have a fairly large family and and I don't have a husband who makes a lot of money. And so I always wanted to find a way to make my life sustainable. And in that, we're going to talk about these various things that I have managed to sort of pull together over time that are both soul satisfying and career satisfying that I think make use of the one thing that unites us, which is this need to tell nonfiction stories. So does that, I mean, I think that gives you kind of a broad context and a broad sort of rubric under which we can, that we all kind of live underneath this umbrella. And that I think is what Doug and I are going to talk mostly about today is where can you go outside of your world and what's at stake, and how do you do it? And how do you and what are sort of what are the requirements, like what are you giving up when you do that? So Doug, do you want to how do you want to kind of form, do you want to
I thought that, first of all, I want to reassure everybody that we're going to give plenty of time for folks to ask their own
yeah.
questions. So I thought we will just kind of converse for the first hour or so and then turn it over to questions from the peanut gallery, as it were. But I want to let's talk about some of these platforms. I, 'cause I have a little bit more of a dire outlook on
I
the
know.
industry, the documentary industry, both in terms of funding um, and particularly distribution. Which is
Mhm.
so frustrating. It's become, you know, as the number of people making films increases exponentially because of
Right,
the
right,
technology.
huge. Right,
Festivals are getting exponentially larger numbers of submissions, and they're getting
right,
pressured to take a certain amount of films that played at Sundance or whatever to bring into their community what they think are some of the docs they most want to see. So the chances of getting into festivals has become slimmer and slimmer, which has, been a big goal of filmmakers, doc filmmakers,
hmm
is to play festivals. It's a very satisfying thing as filmmakers to play before an audience, and to
in a theater.
in a,
Right,
in a theater.
in a theater and
I
have
mean, it's
that
the reason,
interaction.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the reason why geezers like ourselves wanted to get into films because we grew up with films and cinemas. We didn't grow up with
Right,
DVD players and with nonlinear systems and computers and stuff. And so it's very frustrating, not having that. And festivals is actually a small part. You're going to small audiences. The dream, of course, is to get some sort of theatrical distribution, which you and I have both been lucky enough to have. But that's shrinking. The odds of
right,
getting
way
it
down. But
way
right.
down.
Way down.
So to me, that's the context for the discussion is, I mean, here I am on year 10 trying to get funding for a film that I think is the best story I've ever come across in my life. It probably has the most
I
widespread
love
appeal.
it.
Thank you.
Betty and Henri et moi.
Yes, as I call it, the love letter film.
It
Uh,
is.
and, it's been, I'm at the point now, I'm going to be doing a crowdfunding for it in early next year. But part of me goes like, well, what is the point now of spending another like 2, 3 years, whatever it's going to take to get it to the finish line, when, unlike in other years, I don't have a broadcaster like HBO on
Right.
board.
HBO. Right.
Um, the chances of getting them or anybody on board as an acquisition later is very slim. Even now, getting as a producer for this film called My Omaha, which is
Yeah.
amazing, it actually is getting some sort of distribution, but has had a hard time playing in festivals, and it's a fantastic film. So I'm, experiencing firsthand the frustration so many are feeling of even with a terrific film that you know jumped over all the hurdles we have these days of getting made. A first film, a personal doc, a beautiful film, and even that's been like a real struggle to get eyeballs on. So believe me, it's been in the forefront of my mind what other strategies are out there, what alternatives are out there when you have a great story on your hands.
hmm
Whether in my case, it's just, it is a story with great characters and all that. It's
hmm
not a mission-driven, social
Right.
issue film. But there are, it's almost even a more pertinent discussion for people who are doing those kinds of stories, I think.
You mean like social issue films?
Yeah,
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 around the environment, around, you
right,
know, race relations, whatever it is.
right.
So let's talk. So to me, that's the
So yeah,
context.
so you're interested in distribution, and I think a lot of the people are interested in that question.
Right. And
So like
but we're also talking
is
about outlets for our creativity as well.
right. And that's where I want to talk because I think a lot of people can talk about distribution, to be honest. And what are the opportunities. And the only thing I want to say, and as you mentioned, um, I founded Silver Docs. Some of you probably know it if you've been around for a while because it's sort of changed iterations. It was Silver Docs for quite some time, almost I think 20 years, 15 years or so. And then it became AFI Docs and now it's DC Docs. And my dearest friend, Sky Sitney, is totally taken over the reins. But I was the founding director of that festival long before Sky even came on board. Um, and again, I think um, we need to think about like the reality of the of the festival situation is, in my view, has actually not changed all that much. And again, I don't think I'm a Pollyanna, but I don't think I'm as sad as Doug is. The stats have always been not great for most filmmakers. And I say that it's just that so when I ran Silver Docs, we would get about 2,500 films, and again, only documentaries. Of those 2,500 films, 2,000 of those films were never going to play in the festival. They went immediately into the trash for a whole variety of reasons.
You said that
Some of
metaphorically.
them, huh?
You say that metaphorically, going into the
Well,
trash.
not, I mean, no, they were, a bit, but think about it. No, they kind of did go in the trash. We watched them, you always watch everything, but they didn't meet a certain kind of bar. There was something about them that was flawed, whether it was, structurally, technically, character, in terms of the characters, there was something about those films that was just eliminated it from contention immediately. Now we screened 100 films ish, right? So that left 500 films, which is still a lot of films. And so within that 500 films, you would have um, films that had obviously played in other festivals, Sundance, South by Southwest, Tribeca, Blood Out Water. And then there is the art and craft of making a program, which is sort of the programmer's voice, right? So within that, you take Mary Kerr was our first programmer at Silver Docs, and Andrea Pasfiume, who's now at Tribeca and Sundance, she was part of that, and Sky, obviously. But so there's an art to putting together um, that program. So that's only one out of five films that is going to be in the festival. So when you look at what's happening, I would suggest that the festivals that are still, going on, yes, they're struggling a little bit more. Even Sundance is struggling a little bit more. And Toronto is struggling a little bit more. Is that it's the people who are being screened in those festivals is changing. So the fact of having been in festivals before and sort of being kind of a tried and true filmmaker is not necessarily going to get you as far into the door as it used to. They're looking for other new sort of, sometimes more diverse talent and certainly more international. Now, that's not to say that we weren't international to begin with, but we would have, maybe less than a quarter of our films would come from outside the United States. That is really changed. And if you take a look at what's happened in the Academy, which turned me down again this year, so it happens to us all. You have to sort of know that there's been this shift in the industry as it has become more international and more internationally driven, and to be honest, more driven by sort of a younger, different sort of different style of storytelling. And some of that is social issues, some of that is really a different kind of approaching to the narrative. So know that festivals are just one way of not, and I don't want to talk about distribution because, it's like I just went through an entire process in Hollywood with a really, really well-known, executive producer attached to a project that I'm doing. And we had meetings with all of the big ones, HBO, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix. I mean, I've got amazing representation, at some of the biggest agencies, and we're still in constant turnaround. And when I say in constant turnaround, I mean we're it's that place that filmmakers find themselves where they're going like this. I mean, it literally is called being in turnaround. And we're going to be in turnaround for quite some time. Anyway, so what do you do? Well, that process is ongoing because we cannot rely on it. And I think we can no longer rely on it, even more so now than ever before. Because, Doug, as you rightfully point out, there's so many filmmakers. But I will tell you that our competition is not, I mean, there are still that 80% of films that are immediately going into the trash, because it doesn't matter that there's more of them, but there are serious, serious problems of storytelling, character development, technology, all kinds of things that preclude them from becoming actual contenders. And that, I would suggest, has not changed. So
Okay.
just to counter your thoughts about that, I don't want to get stuck on it.
Okay. But I do want to come from a place, let us assume that we're all doing fantastic projects, okay?
Easy. That's where I want to
That are
start. Yes.
non-trash. And
Yes.
that one of the big problems is um, our hopes of getting it seen widely are diminishing. And
Yeah.
now
Okay.
we're
But
being,
that's right. But that's a different question. And I don't want to get into what's happened in the theatrical industry, because
no,
that is,
no, but
that,
this is my lead into,
okay.
okay, if that's where we're at now, and we're being
Yeah.
told to like, let's target our audience. Let's think about who is our primary target, our primary audience for our stories. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, we talked about, museums, you talked about academia, we're going to get into some of these alternative
Right.
platforms. But I think it requires a sort of shift in mindset from
Right.
I'm going to go out and change the world because I'm going to get onto Netflix,
Yeah.
HBO, whatever it is. And now it's more like, okay, what platform can I get that will get it out to this audience that most needs to see it? Or, I'm telling a story and I want to get it in front of eyeballs that I feel, I would like have see it. So
Okay.
let's talk about what these platforms can be.
Okay. But here's what I would here's the way
Mhm.
I want to shift the conversation away from what it is. So, and I think the notion of what is the end game has to change. So if
From what to what?
well, hang on. If our end game is only a feature length film, then you have already eliminated so many possibilities of what it is. And so that's the it that I want to talk about.
Okay.
I want to talk about re envisioning the it. So I no longer go into a project thinking that my it has to be a feature length film. I think of all of the panoply of things that I could do, that my it is not the film, which is only a medium. The it is the story. And so I'm going to take you through, let's use Betty and Henri as the example. Okay? Will you be my guinea pig? Or
Oh,
maybe
hell
not?
yes.
Oh,
Sure,
hell
Dina.
yes.
By the way, it's now Betty and Henri and me.
I
So,
know, et moi. um, so, so in that, there are three characters that are really, really wonderful, that are kind of at the core of this sort of narrative that you've been building over these years, and I've been following it. I would suggest that you should write about it. First and foremost, you should write the Betty and Henri story, and me, the Betty. I'm just going to call it Betty and Henri because that's the way I started with it. Um, the the story itself is charming. The story itself is captivating and full of mystery and has a structure to it. And your involvement, the moi part of it, is equally charming. I would say that you should write about it. And the question is what are the mechanisms? Is what are the mechanisms by which you could write about it? Because I will frequently write about my content. Forget the film for a moment. That's not the it anymore. The it is the story because these platforms build on one another. So, for example, you have this Betty and Henri and moi story. Um, you want to turn it into an essay that you could have come out in maybe in a really like maybe the Paris Review, right? How often has one of our storytellers on this call thought about the Paris Review as a potential outlet for not the it of the film, but of the story of Betty and Henri? Now we know that it's got a Parisian, and again, I use the Paris Review because it's really, really an amazing publication and is read by people who are really the cognoscente around the world. There are tons of these publications. The first thing I do with a story is I take it out for a road test. So if you go to my website, which is seaveymedia.com, I put all those things up at the top, you'll see like a publication list. And there are many. I am writing all the time. I'm writing constantly. And I'm writing for publication. And I'm going to give you just like some really nuts and bolts, kind of approaches to this. Which seems, like maybe it's a little bit too, remedial, but just know that these avenues are out there and available to all of us, and they need to be um, they need to be used because they are constructive. And I mean constructive not in being useful, but meaning they build upon one another.
Nina, if I can interrupt for a second
Sure.
with a question.
Yeah.
Are you saying instead of making the film, go to the Paris Review and write an essay, or are you
It
saying
doesn't,
as a
no,
as
because
a
it doesn't
strategy?
obviate. It doesn't obviate.
Okay.
That's what I want to, you are not giving anything away. You are not, your medium is not the it. If you want to make that feature film, which is your ultimate goal and is the goal of us all, maybe that's not your first foray. Because what you've done is you postponed the conversations that you're having about Betty and Henri. You're not allowing people into your process. We talked the other day about this idea that, of going to the New York Times for this new thing that I don't want to get into the details of it, because I think there's some things that you need to think, that you need to still work out. But the fact is that there are cultural editors and cultural outlets for our storytelling that do not obviate filmmaking. So you're not doing an either or. You are using one medium to expand your horizon about what it is, because each of these its, if you will, are all different. And it takes some research. So, for example, I do a lot of publishing of both narrative nonfiction for stories that I think are just not films, right? But I also do a lot of narrative nonfiction in academic presses, because I am also a professor and have been for the last almost 40 years. I've been the founding director of the Documentary Center at George Washington University. Um, can somebody steal your story? But hold on to that thought, Joanne. But so, but um, and so I sometimes I'll write for academic presses, but sometimes I write for very kind of sort of intelligentsia kinds of literary journals, which have very focused kinds of audiences, but audiences that I want to reach, because that builds my community of people who are interested in this work. So so I'm just going to take the Betty and Henri. So say you write a 3,500 word essay, and it gets into the Paris Review. It gets into the New York Times, in on one of their or it gets onto Slate, or it gets into the Huffington Post, or it gets into all of the different places. And I'm going to put in a link to, well, not a link because I can't do that now, but I use the platform I use. There's a number of them, by the way. I tend to use Duotrope, which to literally track the content that I am creating. And it's a very, very easy platform. But because I am always writing my stories, as I'm also making film, I mean, I'm not, this doesn't stop the process of the filmmaking. But if you talk about the 10 years that you've lived with Betty and Henri, I think you could be writing about Betty and Henri. And with that, you are building an interest and a cognoscente and a world in which this exists. And Rebecca, hang on to that radio idea. Okay, so now I've got some what I would call some traction. Now, look, here's the bad news. I also get rejected a lot. A lot. I get rejected so much. But you know what? Big deal. First of all, a lot of publications, you can, I submit to sometimes 10 publications at once. If I think there are 10 good matches, then hell, I'm applying to them all. Some of them, sometimes they'll say we do not take concurrent submissions, very, very rarely. And then as soon as I get my bite, I write to the other ones and say, I'm withdrawing my submission. But I am constantly being published. And that elevates me as a creator. Granted, it doesn't elevate me as a creator in the film cognoscente, right? But like, do I care? No, I don't care. I don't need to be. Listen, I already am an old white woman. It's like nobody cares about me anymore. But the fact is that do, I am contributing to an entire world that is interested in my content. So let's talk about now, where do you think most podcasts come from? They come from what is written. They come from, now I have done a podcast. I did a podcast called My Fugitive, which did extraordinarily well. I did it during COVID when nobody was working in the film industry, but that was just kind of the luck of the draw. So My Fugitive, yeah, I guess rejection is always part of the process, right? Just get used to it. Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? So big deal. This is today. Let it go. Nobody cares. But the problem with us as filmmakers is that we put these things into like this basket of filmmaking. So we're only worried about the next like proposal deadline. I say that's bullshit. Excuse me. Because there's not enough money out there to support all of this, all these hungry mouths. And a lot of those hungry mouths, by the way, are, I can't help it that I don't live in Egypt, that I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland. And that programmer or that funder wants to be giving voice to international voices in an increasingly, sort of supportive way. Like, so that decreases my chances. Well, okay, fine. Let me go and build my own sandbox. So part of that sandbox is to write. So yeah, it is, Antoine, it is great for international. I agree. Because for too long we were very American centric. And thank God for places like, for people like, Silver Docs, where we were like, okay, we've got 40 countries this year. But now it's really become like absolutely part of the zeitgeist that international filmmakers have to be represented. But again, all that did was to enlarge the number of people that are, the number of people who are vying for the same small number of 100 slots in a film festival, and the 500 that are in contention. Anyway, so where do podcasts come from? So I got into the podcasting industry kind of right at the right time. I did an 8-part podcast. It was produced by Pineapple Street Studios, which is really the gold standard. I mean, they got kind of consumed because they were the gold standard by a big company. They got, bitten up by the bigger fish, by Odyssey. And but podcasting is reaching, I cannot tell you how many ears, huge numbers of ears. So just alone, my podcast did about 1 million downloads. Now, I defy you to tell me about a film that, unless it's getting really great distribution, is going to be seen by over 1 million people. But that was a story that I had been doing a film about for a very long time. And I thought, you know what? Maybe it's a podcast. So what happened? I did the podcast. It did really well. It won a bunch of awards. I wrote about it for an academic press for the University of Missouri Press. So I got some other, sort of, like another push out of it. And then I get contacted, which is how I made my inroads into Hollywood, by an agency, by the Gersh agency, and said, we think that we can take this and put this into development as a made for television, like even if it's just like a made for television movie, but we want to try to go out and take this thing for some kind of narrative treatment. Well, all of a sudden, that's like a different conversation. Like, why wouldn't I want to have that conversation? That doesn't obviate me doing the it thing, Doug, of making my fugitive film. But you know what it does do is that it gives me anchors. It gives me like stakes in the ground that don't have me waste my time waiting for Sundance to make their decision, or the Sundance Institute, or the Tribeca Film Fund, and look, I'm still doing all those things, right? Because that's what we have to do. But we're waiting too much for this it. And I would suggest that we're wasting our creative time by being wedded to something that, as you say, there are fewer and fewer opportunities to get into that box. But I would suggest that it's because you haven't broken down the sides of that box. You haven't gone to the New York Times or the Paris Review or to Wondery or to or to Joe Rogan, or I don't know who, to have a conversation about what it is that you're doing. So, but here's the trade-off. And I'm going to go back to, I think it was Joanne. I have real bad at names. Somebody said, well, what about stealing your story? You know what? No, I never worry about somebody stealing my story. If anybody is insane enough to go down the rabbit holes that each one of us is living in, like, more power to them. Honestly, it's like we have become so, like, I don't know, it's almost like we're so precious that it's just like, you know what? Nobody gives a shit. Excuse my language. Nobody cares. They're interested in being entertained. They're interested in reading something interesting. They're interested in listening to something interesting, and they're interested in watching something interesting. And the amount of work that it takes to do these things is so ungodly that it is literally part of our madness. So, no, I don't worry about it in the slightest. So, I'm going to tell you about a recent failure I had, because I love failure. Failure are us, right? So, I started making this documentary called Nuclear Fallout. And I'm not going to get into the details of it, but it's called Nuclear Fallout. Here, I'll write it down. It's called Nuclear. Hang on, I'm typing it out. Nuclear Fallout, the St. Louis Baby Tooth Survey. Okay, so oopsie. Okay, so this is it's a story about something that happened in St. Louis, which is where I grew up, in response to the open air nuclear testing. And I don't want to go into it's like a whole one of these Shaggy Dog stories. So I decide I'm going to make this little film about this nuclear fallout. And so I'm going to make this film, and because I have found this amazing archive that nobody has ever found. And I think to myself, there's not enough visualization actually for a film. So I'm already now an accomplished podcaster, right? So it's like, oh, it's a podcast. So I go on this thing called My Nuclear Life, which is a podcast about like this nuclear, sort of like everything nuclear. It's done by a physicist. So already I'm in a world that like I don't, like that it's like I don't normally deal with physicists. So now I'm talking to physicists, and I get in touch with this. I find out in this research something very, very odd about my participation in this test that happened in 1963, 62, 61. I participated in a test. And now, because of my nuclear life, somebody found out about me, and I am being tested by a group of epidemiologists at Harvard University. I am being tested for the rest of my life until I die, which we hope is a while away, by this team of epidemiologists at Harvard University. So, me being a filmmaker, podcaster, storyteller, blah, 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 I decide that I've really got a great podcast, but the podcast industry is kind of taking a little bit of a hit right now. And I decide maybe it's not the right time. So I start sending, but I think this is too big for just like a little literary journal. So I go to the Atlantic. The Atlantic is a very big publication. And I pitch them this story just to write an article. And they get back to me and they said, oddly enough, we're just about to do an issue on the 80th anniversary of the first nuclear test. I'm like, okay, like who knew, right? Like nobody knows that except the Atlantic. Like we're 80 years later. This is at the beginning of this summer. So at the beginning of the summer, they say, okay, we'll take what you're going to do but deadline's very short. And I write the essay. And they give me at least initially they give me 10,000 words. Then they give me 4,000 words. And then they put me with an editor who says I only have 2,500 words. The managing editor, we get to the last week of June, and right at the deadline. And they said, we want the published results, at least the first published results from from this team at Harvard before we can go ahead and publish this. And now we're not going to publish this. So they killed the piece. Dead. They gave me what's known as a kill fee, which I had negotiated. It was pretty high because it's the Atlantic and they can afford it. So I take the pitch and I send it to my literary agent, who had been my agent when I made a film a long time ago. And she's never agreed to agent me since then. She's with a very big agency, but she agented a book that I did with the paralyzing fear, the story of polio in America in the late 90s. And I did a book in association with that film. I took it back to Miriam. And I said, will you pitch this to the New Yorker or to the New York Times? And she said, she read it and she said, no, because I think you have a book. So I wrote a very extensive book proposal that is now being shopped to the only the big houses. And now it's called Nuclear Fallout, the St. Louis Baby Tooth Survey, and the Progress of American Science. And she feels, I think we've got a book. We're getting really, really good response. So I will tell you that the it changes. Big deal. And you know what? I'll still make a film about it because you know what the book is going to do? It's going to give me the wherewithal and the clout to do the film. It's not going to be the whole thing because you know what? That's going to be too big. But you know what? I'll do the film. But in the meantime, I'm not wasting my time trying to get money from this kind of, from this basically blood from a stone. Do you understand what I'm arguing for? I'm arguing for not waiting. I'm arguing, um, yeah, Wesley, if the it changes, big deal, still make a film. But right, I can still make a film. I know how to make a film. But if you don't, and look, at every one of these turns, there's a compromise. And I want to talk about the downside of it a little bit, right? And the downside is that each one of these its have a different set of rules. And Doug, I know you want to make sure that we have enough time for what do you call it, for
No
our
worries, no
questions, because I
worries,
know
Nina.
there's, huh?
No worries. You are like the
Okay.
easiest interview I've ever had. I just sit back and
Well, I'm just so passionate about what I feel like this is. I'm talking to my tribe. I want to get you out of like the hole that we're stuck in because I am optimistic.
yeah. I'll throw
I
out.
really, huh?
I,
I
I
just think this world is made for us.
yeah.
I
I
think
think
this
the bottom
world,
line, Nina, is empowering ourselves.
yes,
Rather than sitting around and waiting for someone to see our pitch deck at somewhere where we can get funding, some grant proposal. It's
right,
like, what can we do? And for me, it was starting a Substack a couple of months ago,
right.
where
And
I
I
am
thought
waiting.
that's perfect. And
Yeah,
you need to build on that. You need to monetize it. You need to use your clout of who you are in this, like in this world. And we talked about this the other day. I mean, you're going to bring with you, I mean, there's 105 people right now on this one conversation, right? You're bringing hundreds and hundreds of filmmakers with you and everybody that they know to maybe, a digital endeavor for the New York Times as you continue to roll out Betty and Henri, but not necessarily immediately as a film. But you weren't going to make the film right away anyway because you're waiting for the money. But you know what's going to attract HBO? The fact that you're in the New York Times. That's going to make a cultural editor, I mean, it's going to make, somebody at HBO or Netflix, they're going to say, oh, that's going to perk them right up.
yeah,
But, but I want to talk about some of the downsides. I
yes,
do,
please.
because there are, and we should be conscious of them. Um, um, we have our, what do you call it? We have our conventions. We as filmmakers, I mean, the people who are on the D word are already involved in a dialogue, are already involved in a certain kind of hopefully higher level of filmmaking that's putting us into that group of 500. And as I always say to my students, my whole goal is to keep you out of the group of 2,000. But so hopefully we're all in that sweet spot of, like where the programmer is starting to find his or her voice. And you may or may not be a part of that, but that's not something you can control. Um, so we know our conventions. Podcasting also has conventions, and they actually don't want to hear about our conventions. It doesn't matter to them. The world in which the New York Times exists has their own conventions and their own tribe and their own conversations that is just like this one on their own. And the question is how willing are you willing to be to adopt the conventions of other tribes? And for me, I don't have a problem with it. I've been a filmmaker and a college professor, and being a college professor is totally different than being a filmmaker. I think all about pedagogy and I think all about, how do people learn? And I could be teaching, Walt Whitman, for as much as I just think about the process of what do people know and how do they come to know it, which is a different endeavor than filmmaking. So I feel very flexible and I feel very, kind of open-minded. And if you're not open-minded, then you know what? This isn't going to work for you. If you can't get outside of your own, and it's ego for us. I mean, I'm well known in the film world. I don't want to be seen as like nothing in some other world, but you know what? You need to suck it up. So when I went into the podcasting world, my producer, who sent me a sample of this podcast that she wanted to kind of replicate for our podcast, like we were just starting out. And it was like basically it was her insulting me. It was the most insulting thing. It was like here was this person who had a story, and then the producer was going to come in and tear it apart in front of this huge audience of people who were listening. And I was like, well, this doesn't seem like very much fun to me. And she's like, well, are you game to do it? And I'm like, sure. I knew it because, and we didn't do it that way because it was a stupid idea, and I knew it was a stupid idea. But you have to be game for pretty much anything. I was just nominated for what's known as the Pushcart Prize. The Pushcart Prize is really a great honor in the in the literary world. And and that to me signified that, I have learned something about that world that has made me um like that my peers in that world honored me. Now, I will tell you that if I said to you, oh, I got nominated for the Pushcart Prize, they're like, and I say it to this group, they're like, oh, does that mean you're a peddler now? It's like, no, I mean, the fact is that it doesn't mean anything to you. But in the world of literary, like of memoir and literary journals and people who think about ideas, the Pushcart Prize is a very, very big deal. So you have to understand that you're going to enter a world in which you're a nobody. So big deal. I don't care. I mean, I only have X amount of time on this planet, which now Harvard seems to be calculating because they're like wondering when am I going to give them my last test samples. But at the same time, I want to be involved. I want to be in the conversation. I want to be in a conversation that doesn't make me wait to feel validated by people who don't. I mean, I would say everybody that I pitched in this kind of this whirlwind that I've been in the in this, in this Hollywood, kind of, the work I'm doing, on the plot. It's called The Plot to Kill a King, and um, and here they go, and so and again we have insane representation on that I was able to attract for this project, and there was not a person over the age of 40 or maybe even 35 that I pitched. And they just take these meetings one after the other, after the other, after the other. And we've gotten some really, really, I mean, we've gotten some great responses. And we have risen to the level of being in sort of constant turnaround as opposed to being killed. But the bottom line is that these people don't know who I am. They don't care who I am. And so that, and a lot of the things that I know, they don't know. And and so I assume they know nothing. And that's actually probably a good assumption. But that world, the world of Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, that world is a world that is not, I mean, these are the moment at which all of these companies took reality television and documentary and put them together was the place that we stopped having a conversation about most of our work. Because, to be honest, almost everybody I pitched had come out of reality television, because that's where the money is being made and has been being made in documentary, in what they call non-scripted. I didn't pitch documentary acquisitions people. I pitched non-scripted acquisitions people. And not one of them, and I'll be honest with you, I'm 68 years old. I mean, I, thought about having my hair dyed. Then I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to be who I am. And, it worked, to a certain extent. Like I said, we're sort of in perpetual turnaround. But the fact is that, look, I've got a series, I've got a book, that looks like it's catching wind. I've got, a brand new Pushcart Prize nomination. I've got, a number of podcasts out there now. That's storytelling. And so I don't want to talk about distribution as kind of, I want to talk about that as a method of storytelling. I don't want to talk about that as being the it. So, okay, so that's where I'm at. It's 1 o'clock, Doug, and I want to give people, because I stopped being
Mhm.
able to read these things because
Yeah,
I wanted to get,
we've already called for people. So, folks, if you have a
okay,
question or a comment or anything, use the raised
yeah.
hand function, and I
But
will come.
wait, can I just say one thing before we
Yes,
do the
you
kind of
may
quick?
say one thing, and
Okay,
may I ask one question also?
yeah, you can, right. So I just want to say one thing on my own behalf, which is that I did write one book for us, and I do want you to know about it if you don't already know about it. It's called the Documentary Filmmakers Workbook, and if you like the way I talk, this book is entirely written in my voice, but it actually is intended to help you get your through your film and out of that make sure that you're not in the world of 2000, and you're in only the lump of 500. And it's called, and I just brought a little copy with me. It's a little crazy. It's kind of a crazy book. It's on Amazon, and on one side is directing the documentary, and it's got exercises and content and quotes and all kinds of things that you need to be thinking about. Again, I've been a professor for 40 years, and I know how people do this. And then you turn it over and upside down, and on the other side, it's producing documentary. And so it's actually two books in one. It's done really, really well. It's in its second printing already. But think about it, because honestly, we are all making mistakes that I am worried are pushing us out of the conversation, even in our filmmaking. So that was I just wanted to, because I don't write too much for documentary filmmakers, but this book, I sat down for a year and I wrote this book. And it's very graphically driven, it's very visually driven, it's very much the way that we think as filmmakers. And so I just want to talk, I just want to say that, because in some ways this is like it was just something I had inside me after 40 years of teaching. I'm like, I can't teach thousands and thousands of people, but I can teach thousands of people if they go through this book. So anyway, end of discussion on that.
Yeah, so I just wanted, before we get to the questions, I want to
Yeah.
sort of ask a partly clarifying question, which is, are you throwing some of this stuff out there as like strategies to help get your film made, or are you suggesting that these are actually, open your mind to, these might be ends in and of themselves?
Both.
Okay.
So I say never. So how did I know that this little film about this tooth survey that I did in 1962 was going to end up, and I think it's a little historical piece, maybe a short or whatever, is going to end me up on this podcast. My Nuclear Life is going to end me up in front of the Atlantic, who's going to end me up in at Random House. I mean, I am always looking, it's like I'm always pivoting. I'm always thinking about the next way to tell that story. And sometimes it is just an end into itself. So I wrote an essay that's on my website about something that happened between my son and myself when he was 15. Um, and 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 it wasn't a film, but it was a story I had inside of me. And and that, I mean, it went to a really, really good publication. I did another one, The Bar 1982, which was about my time as a bartender in a gay bar at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. There's really no film in that, but it was just a story I was desperate to tell. And so sometimes these things are ends into themselves, but a lot of times they are like they're stakes in the ground, so that I go to a distributor or to an agent or to an agency, and I say, okay, I've got my million people who've already listened to the My Fugitive podcast, and now you're talking about casting somebody as Howard Mechanic. Okay, that's a good conversation for me to have. So I would say that some things are sort of an end into themselves. And I think you need to be kind of very hard on yourself about what each one is, so that you don't go down, sort of like, I knew that there was nothing about The Bar 1982 that was going to be anything different than just that memoir. And I was glad to do that.
Yeah.
But I wanted people to know about it.
Yeah.
I
Also,
wanted it to
just,
be part of my legacy.
I mean, I think there's something else in there, and that is, when I started the Substack, it was purely with the idea that this was going to lead towards getting, a crowdfunding campaign for Betty and Henri and me early next year.
Hmm.
That I wanted to build up my subscriber base, build up an email list, get people excited, but talk about the film, as you mentioned. And the funny thing is, it is becoming more and more in my mind as I see the possibilities of Substack. It could very well be an exhibition space. I'm actually rethinking the form in which the film will come out. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of been a shock and a revelation to me as I'm going along.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would just throw out that in rethinking what the it is, it could shift into something quite exciting and creative and fulfilling in its own right. That's just a different way
Absolutely.
of getting the same story out there. And by the way, it doesn't preclude getting the film I have in mind made.
No, it
Uh,
doesn't. It
yeah,
doesn't. It doesn't obviate anything because nobody's going to steal your stuff.
no,
You're not going to go. No, and that's true of. It's just stop worrying about you know about like the and I don't want to say this in a negative. Well, it's a certain kind of conceit, and I don't say that pejoratively, but it's a certain kind of conceit to believe that somebody cares as much about something as you do. And I don't say that about you as in particular. I'm just saying us about you as like the world. That these are our passions.
no.
And so let them be our passions. And people are fine with that. And they can become some part of somebody else's passion, which is great.
No.
But but they're just going to come as a visitor. Anyway, go ahead and ask questions. I don't want
Sure,
to
I will.
um
By the way, it's a sort of adjacent thing. My last Substack post was on the theme of, the best piece of filmmaking advice I ever got was we wouldn't worry so much what people think of us if we realized how seldom they do.
yes,
It's kind of like a similar idea that we have this ego, and
right.
we're
Nobody cares about what you're
nobody
down.
cares. And
No.
the film can be
And
great. I mean,
think about those 36-year-old, non-scripted, reality producer television, acquisitions executives that you're pitching your precious project to, that are literally going to give you 30 minutes and then do another and then another and then another and then another and then another. It's, believe me,
yeah.
nobody cares.
But it's also liberating when you actually
It
think
is
about it.
liberating.
It's like,
It's like,
why are
how
we
good is
worried
that?
when you're making a personal documentary, and if you're like hung up on what people are going to think of me or this character in the film, or what right do I have to tell this story, or I'm going to look like an idiot, you're paralyzed,
You
But
are paralyzed and you're waiting for validation
yep.
from somebody who is not going to give it to you.
Or if you
They
get
might, by some
validation,
chance, they might.
yeah.
But
Nina, if
why
you get
wait
the
for them?
validation, and believe me, I got it. The next day, I mean, I got the review of reviews in the New York Times for 51
Yeah,
Bird Street. The next day, people are using it to line their bird cages. It's
exactly.
yesterday's news.
It's yesterday's news.
And so you just have to take the bad with the good, just keep plowing away and not be
How
so egocentric.
and learn about that other world. Learn about that other tribe. What are their customs? What are their conventions? How can you be part of their dialogue? And not worry so much about who's going to the next. I mean, yeah, if I'm pissed off that the academy keeps turning me down, but you know what, it makes me feel better that that big publishing houses are interested in my story, so I'll console myself with that. It's like, because there's no end game involved in just one it. There's so many it's. Anyway,
Okay,
so
on to questions. Nancy, you've been waiting patiently. Come on.
yes, I'm sorry.
Hi, Nina. Thank you. This has been super interesting. Somebody recently told, I was on a podcast about my film, and somebody recently, and the person said, you should do a podcast. And I was like, for me, it doesn't seem like the right format just because I don't like speaking endlessly. But I wanted to just make a comment that I used to work at the New York Times as a photographer, staff photographer, and I came upon a story of a guy who lived in my neighborhood in Brooklyn who had collection, he was working for the project, but he had a collection of baby teeth from the 1950s for this study of,
Joe Mangano.
yes. And I don't know if you saw the
Big buddies with
story.
Joe Mangano.
He is such a character. And this summer, he wrote me a letter because he lost contact with me because I'm not at the New York Times anymore. And he wrote me a letter and he said how much he loved the story. And they talk about it at their conference. And he was just so happy. So I was just going to say, if you didn't know him,
Oh
that,
yeah.
I'm
Joe and I
just,
are like, we're bonded at the hip.
oh, I have to tell, like when I speak to him again, I have to tell him that. But so
Absolutely. No,
you
Joe's
saw the
he's a
story.
what a character.
What a character. Yeah. And
What a
I
big
knew he
he's a
was a
big
great
buddy of
story.
Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, well, Alec Baldwin's like gives them money, gives money for the project.
Yeah.
And you saw the story
Anyway,
by Andy Newman that was in the Times?
yes, I did.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Anyway, I don't want to go into it because
Yeah,
it's very specific. But
right,
yeah, I it's really, these things just surprise you.
right. Yeah. No,
So
it was great, great,
yeah,
great
but no,
project. Sorry.
Joe and I are bonded at the hip.
Nancy, is there a specific question you want to ask
No,
or
just wanted to make the comment and say
okay.
thank you for the talk.
All right. Thank you. Carol.
Hi, thanks. This was really inspirational. I was just wondering, not to be a pessimist or a downer, but you had mentioned a few times things that were disadvantageous to this approach, and I was just curious what those were.
Well, okay, so something that's disadvantageous is that first of all, you're nobody in this world, in that new conversation, in that new tribe, that you have to build your credibility all over again. You need to be open to that. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people need, a lot of support and a lot of, validation. And I understand that. And, we all do. But you know what? You got to get rid of it. If you're going to live in a world that's flexible and that moves, kind of a little bit more seamlessly and, through an osmosis into other, it kind of morphs into other forms, you kind of have to take it on the chin. You're going to get rejection there too, but hell, we're all getting rejected anyway. So what do we care? But the other thing is that you have to be open-minded about making sure that you learn those customs and that you learn to speak that new language. And that's not a facility that not everybody has. And so and again, I would sort of tiptoe into it because you have to be careful about what kind of different circumstances that you might confront. But I think you need to have a certain flexibility. And if you're somebody who is like is I don't know, I don't want to say it um is harmed, and I don't want to say harmed, but it's a certain kind of a certain kind of rigidity. Maybe that's it. This isn't going to work for you. But I will tell you that if you can be flexible, if you can be positive, even in the face of rejection, I mean, which we're all getting anyway, then this opens up an entire world of possibilities of how to tell a story without, I don't see it giving up anything. You're not giving up your film. You're augmenting the chances of it actually happening. So, why wouldn't you take it on the chin
But
and learn something new?
You said be careful. What did you mean by that?
Be careful. I don't. Can you remind me of the context?
That you can do all this that you're suggesting. You shouldn't
Yeah.
be rigid. You have to be open-minded and not too sensitive, but you
Yeah.
have to be careful.
I guess careful
Well, you have
about
to be careful.
criticism.
Just of your own psychology, I guess. I mean, you
Yeah,
have to be.
rejection.
Yeah, you have to be careful about your response to rejection. You can't. I used to have a thing when I was an early on filmmaker that when I got rejected from something, I gave myself 24 hours. I took a bath and then I had to get over it. That was my way of dealing with it. And I got a lot of rejection, but I also got a lot of acceptance, because I came along, kind of in the early 90s. And I was sort of kind of in a certain kind of zeitgeist where I could kind of push myself forward. But if you can't get over rejection, is like, as Doug says, even the best news is, the next day is lining somebody's birdcage. So it doesn't even matter that something good happened. But it also doesn't matter that something bad happened. I've gotten some of the worst reviews of my life. Shame on Elvis Mitchell. And some of the best reviews in my life. Thanks, Janet Katsoulis. But it's just part of our journey. So make that journey bigger. Make that journey more expansive. Go onto a terrain that you've never been on before and let yourself be guided, as Doug says, because something will occur to you that maybe you hadn't even thought of before because it was so narrow.
Good. Thanks, Carol. Joanne?
Nina, this is very inspirational and puts a lot of things on my mind. One thing that you talk about learning different tribes, one thing I've found that the tribes you want to learn about and get your story out to don't always exist in New York and Los Angeles. There's a
Yeah.
huge country here in the Midwest where there are people who would be interested in whatever you want to talk about, even if they don't have the same political views you do.
Yeah, right.
If you approach them and say, "Hey, I got this idea, I got this story, what do you think?" You've just broadened the group of people that would be interested in what you're doing and that you can get feedback from them. So I don't really have a question. I just
But
always
no, I think you're right
read
on the
feel
money.
that way.
I say amen, Joanne, because to be honest, we tend, I mean, again, obviously you're at Northwestern. I was I born and raised in St. Louis. The fact is that this is a big country. A lot of times, I just had an article come out about my work in St. Louis Magazine. Thrilled to death. It was, I do a lot of work in the Midwest. I tell a lot of Missouri stories. I think it's a very, very underreported area of the country. It's a very misunderstood part of the country. It's a part of the country people don't care about. But you know what? I'm not among those people. I really believe that some of the most interesting stories, I mean, I think there's been a lot mined on the coasts. I think that the Midwest, the West, and the South's a little bit somewhat less because, a lot of the Southern stories have become, almost trite in their kind of their frameworks. But there is so much that hasn't been talked about the Midwest, about the West, about the border states, like what's coming out of Illinois? Not too much, in terms of really interesting Chicago, like not even Chicago stories. But I have to say, I just, I think, a lot of times I will submit to the Midwestern Review, which is a really great publication. I'm always looking for ways of broadening the geographic. I told Doug, go to the Paris Review. You've got a Betty and Ollie story. Go to the Paris Review. Think about it. Don't worry about the New York Times. Don't think about those, people in those non-scripted, at 38, they're 20, they're 34-year-old acquisitions people at Hulu. So
Yeah.
Anyway, I just, you do have you do have a really great Chicago. I have a lot of great Chicago filmmaker friends, but you're right. But, what I would call outstate Illinois, not so much Chicago, because Chicago really breeds a lot of great stuff. But not too much coming out of Knoxville, not too much coming out of, Louisville. not too much. I mean, there's just not too much coming out of Milwaukee, not too much coming out of St. Louis except Ferguson, and there's a lot more to that story than's been told. So anyway, just amen to that.
Yeah. Thanks, Joanne. Oh man, I'm gonna completely bungle your name. Joma, how do we pronounce it? You're up and unmute yourself, sir.
Um,
Oh,
Ijoma.
thank you. Hi, Joma.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question. So she was talking, Mrs. Mina was talking about rejection, like when she was teaching. So she was talking about rejection. So my question is, how were you able to use the rejection that you faced to your own for your own advantage? How were you use it? How were you able to use it for your own advantage? I mean, to your own advantage. Yeah, that's my question.
Okay, no, it's a good question. I think it's something that we all struggle with so much. So I think that's a really important nerve that you're touching. Because you know what rejection does to me? It makes me mad. And mad is good. Because I don't want to feel sad. I want to get even. I want to feel like, you know what? You rejected me. Well, screw you. Excuse me for my language, but
Oh, I'm the same way, Nina. I'll show you fuckers,
yeah,
It's
like
really, yeah.
let me take you down. But look, maybe I'm not going to take you down in a way that matters to you. I don't care. Maybe your rejection of me from the academy or whatever, and me and my, pushcart prize nomination don't match. But you know what? Our, we have to find our people. And just because some people don't want you and don't want to be, don't want to sort of give you their anointing, doesn't mean that you're any less of a person, and whether it's family or friends or, or people at work or whatever your communities are, I mean, of which we have many, the idea that somehow you turn back into your community, you grab your nourishment that you need, and you just go. Do not stop. If you get a rejection, give yourself 24 hours. Fair enough. But do not give yourself 25 hours.
Great.
Do not. That's an indulgence. And we cannot afford self-indulgence. You're going to just take it. You're going to take that fighting spirit that we all, that we all have, and we're going to get back in the ring. And that's the way we're going to get whatever it is that we want in whatever form, because we're going to open our minds to whatever it is, because the it is going to get bigger. And that's what gives us power.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Great question.
Ellie,
Hi, can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I have a question. To kind of open one's mind to possibility, is there any kind of restrictions or anything about doing a podcast and attempting to distribute it as an episode at the same time? So kind of you're going on two different paths. One would be a pod of the same material, let's say, 30-minute thing, and to take that 30 minutes and also say, well, this is going to be part of the film.
No, there's no conflict at all. The only thing and you ask an interesting question. The only thing that you need to do is to make sure that the medium that you are working in. So say you're doing the podcast and you're getting distribution on it. Maybe somebody paid you to do it, whatever it is, that is exclusive to the medium that is in itself. So for example, you don't give, you don't give like all rights in all perpetuity to the people who are the podcast. No, you give them the rights to that form of media only. It's exclusive. Now, you may not be able to then go out and sell that podcast to somebody else. You probably can't do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't take that material, put it into another medium. Presto changeo, it's a different thing. Doesn't matter that it's some of the same material. It's used in a different way. It's contextualized differently. It's presented differently. They don't own it. They only own the form in which it is presented in that podcast. That's up.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you.
Connie, you are up.
Good question.
Thanks, Doug. Nina, this is quite amazing. I have a situation question that I want to ask you, but before I do, I just want to make a quick comment. Rejection, my take on rejection. To me, rejection is a disappointment, but I take that and turn around and open a door to a gift. If I get a rejection, for example, let's say I got a rejection on a grant, I will immediately contact them and say, I received your notice. Thank you very much. And I know you don't have many people there and you have a lot of people applying for grants, but I'm going to reapply. So I need feedback. And I need to know that before I can reapply. It's not to my own. It's not to my own fairness. If I don't find out tell me what's not working. That's all. And I always get it. Every rejection, I turn into a gift. And I'm telling you, I would say 75% of the time I get feedback that is awesome. So anyway, that's my
good for you. And that's such a great, Connie, that's a great point. I mean, go back and and reapply to everything. Always.
Oh, I do.
Always.
I do.
Yeah. A million times.
Of course of course I have to get farther in the film to reapply. Okay, here's my thought. So when I first started listening to you today, I was very excited. I was very inspired. And right now my state of being is overwhelmed from listening to all the possibilities. And here's why. And I know Doug's in the same place, and many of the people here in the same place. I am right now at this point. I've been shooting a film since September of 2011.
Okay.
I'm in post. I'm shooting it. I'm producing it. I'm writing it. I'm posting it. I'm doing everything. And there's several of us doing it that way. So I think to myself, I'm learning new software every day just to keep up with it. I don't know what I'm doing in a lot of cases. I get, so anyway, I can't even imagine being all those things to myself to get this film finished. And how do I have to schedule grocery shopping at this point. I can't do laundry for almost 3 weeks sometimes. I put shower on my schedule today.
Go into that.
How?
Okay,
I'm going to do it again. But how do I? Let me just ask the question, and I want to hear everything you have to say.
Yeah.
How do I continue after 14 years, and I'm almost there? I'm in post. How do I stop? How do I fit in between writing a story, doing a podcast? I have no idea. That's learning something. I'm overwhelmed with new software.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea, however, but how do I make it possible? I'm in total defeat right now. I rarely feel defeated.
No, you're not defeated. Here's what I would recommend. You've been doing this for 14 years, right?
That one.
Right. Take a break. Give yourself, no, I'm serious. So wait a minute. For 14 years, you have not been making for 14 years, you have been working on something that, has been consuming you. The best thing that you can do right now is step back. Honestly, what difference would it make? You know what would
Deadlines.
make you stronger? Well, maybe deadlines. I mean, if you feel like you really have a deadline and there's something for a funder or whatever that's invaluable, obviously you have to meet it. But to be honest, I rarely know a filmmaker who would not benefit from taking a break.
Well, on that note, I did take a break. I don't know if this counts or not. I mean, I have gotten a bunch of little grants and I have deadlines to make these grants. I need to meet their deliverables.
Yeah.
My sister was here for 2 weeks. I didn't even let my computer be out on the table. To me, that was a break, and I'm being punished now, catching up for 2 weeks.
Well, but
not
okay, I
doing
don't want to go into
anything.
the details, but I'm going to tell you something.
Okay.
For 14 years, you have not, I mean, if you had thought about some of this, and maybe it's too late for this project. I mean, I still think that if something's been working on for 14 years, you probably could have, somewhere in year 7, you could have taken a break and taken literally, taken a hands off, think about it, write about it, use a different form. You're right. You're not going to do a podcast around it right now, but you know what? I would definitely write about it. I think writing about it will clarify the end process. I can promise you it will.
I can do that.
Promise you that. And being with your sister for 2 weeks does not count as time off, because that's just a different endeavor. No, you need time off to think about this project. And I would guarantee writing about it will help your process. Anyway, Doug is coughing. So I'm going to say, he's like,
time to go, Connie.
No comment. That's not a comment. That's not.
Okay, well, just in case.
10-day meditation retreat, Connie.
Well, maybe.
Erica,
I'm going to Breadloaf. Go to Breadloaf.
Or even a 2-day meditation.
Exactly.
I say go to Breadloaf.
Erica, you are going to be our final questioner, and then I have one final one, and we will wrap it up.
Sure. I wanted to say, first of all, this is all very funny because Doug, you won't remember this, but I met you 22 years ago or something like that when I was just getting started.
When you were like 10 years old, 5 years old?
No, when I was like 20, in my early 20s.
What? Okay.
And I really wanted to be a documentary filmmaker back then. I didn't see a route to making it an income generating activity with any kind of ROI. So I actually went into journalism. I might be the only one who went into it for the money, but I just love what Nina has been saying, because I kind of made that decision in my 20s, and I'm now getting back into documentary, but I wanted to just say, like, there are so many journalistic outlets that I've worked at where the first thing I did was call up all the documentary filmmakers I knew and say to them, do you want to make a little money off of your film before you finish your film? And even when I was at a newswire at AFP, I would buy the rights to use a minute and a half of someone's footage to do a quick story that was like some piece of their documentary. And that worked really, really well from the perspective of someone who was in a newsroom and needed really cool stories and wanted to help out their friends. But I really encourage people, if you can, whether it's OpDocs at the New York Times or like Business Insider, I just left there. They do incredible documentaries. Like, yeah, I really want to highlight what Nina is saying. Sorry, this is not a question, but it's maybe good for a period at the end of the sentence of this. What Nina is saying is so important. It's always been there. It's always been that way. Like, you can use your audio for audio content. You can use the story for written content. You can use the video or pieces of the video. You can have a 1 hour and 20 minutes documentary that's super nuanced and complicated with a million story arcs. Pick one of the story arcs you left on the cutting room floor and pitch that to a news organization. They're starving for original, great stories that are not multiplied a million times by every website. So it's Erica, what she's saying could not be more important, and it is a revenue stream that you can amortize your filmmaking.
Thanks, Erica. What documentary are you working on now? What did you?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I just left my job on September 5th. So so
Some time.
it's been a
Been a
minute.
week.
I'm gonna take Nina's advice and take a little break while I come up with some great ideas. But I do have
Yeah.
a film that just came out today on YouTube about data centers.
Email me and we'll find out how we met. And
South by Southwest 2006. You were
okay.
I think you were doing 51 Birch Street.
Yeah. Anyway,
I've watched your career since then, and I'm very impressed by you.
well, happy to talk more. Just email me and we'll talk more.
But no, Erica, great. And I love this comment about what was left on the cutting room floor and
It's
what
valuable.
it's so valuable.
Yeah.
And that's,
Because like you don't have to think just
yeah, I'm
about
so
hour and 20
glad
minute
that
stories. You can think of
you
minute
made
and
that
20
comment.
Yeah.
20
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Erica. So
Yeah.
final thing, Nina, we didn't talk about two possibilities for, there's right. Well, you did. I mean, you talked about writing, and obviously, like pitching a magazine piece, about your story is one obvious one. You know, I still think people underutilize their websites for the film. They basically tend to be like press kits, online press
Right.
kits,
Yeah.
when in fact they can really interest people so much more when you're pitching. We think, okay, it's a pitch deck. It's almost a separate form. But I don't know. I always thought like if worst came to worst, I would just turn my website into its own little work of art.
Juggernaut. Well, I mean, here's the thing is that is, and I do, I mean, I have a pretty active website. And when I look at like the traffic through my site, because I have like a consulting business and I have the book and I have, all of this content on there and films and whatnot. And I have a pretty active website, but my goal in life is not to draw people to my website. My goal is to, try to get my stories out. And I would rather leverage other people's strength than try to kind of go from, kind of my own little world and get people to come into it.
Right.
Now, I guess that to me, not to say that it's a bad idea, but I would just say that, like people always say, oh, I'm going to do this crowdfunding. And then I always say, well, that's a great idea, but that's like a full-time job right there. So, in order to really do justice, I'd rather leverage somebody else's strength and be a part of their world than kind of go into my own world and draw people to it. Only because that's just not it's probably not what I'm good at.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I'm not, I just am not, yeah, and I'd probably have been better off if I was more of a, I'm not a good self promoter. I mean, I just love the work and I just want to be doing the work.
Yeah. Well, I think if there's a takeaway from this, I mean, there's many, many different ways of
Right. And
talking
that's
about
certainly
this.
a
It's
way,
just,
or Vimeo or YouTube or whatever.
yeah, the
Those
whole
platforms
point.
exist.
Yeah, YouTube is a big underutilized one that we've talked about in the past, and it's just opening our minds to different means of expression that are both, can be both artistically satisfying and, just help us on the road to getting this film made in whatever form that turns out to be.
And
Yeah,
look, here's the thing is my whole thing is stop waiting.
yeah,
Like stop, like just tell the stories. There's so many ways to do it. As you say, things will appear to be, I mean, it sounds very Zen, and I'm not particularly a Zen person, but things are revealed to you in the process about potential,
mhm,
and it never obviates the end game, but change what the it is. And I think you have a much more satisfying career experience that feels much richer, much more exciting, much more optimistic, and much less reliant on this crazy kind of world in which we live, which has lots and lots of expansions and contractions, which every industry does. So just change your it.
Good note to end on.